Today, what we're going to do is draft the mermaid skirt. Here's the mermaid skirt that we're going to draft. As we can see, it has a flared bottom, 3 darts in front, princess seams in back, and a waistband. There's some other specifications here that the skirt is full length and the flounce begins at 50% of the full length. So this is about half of the skirt down here with the flare and half the skirt up here. It's full length, so we don't need to crop it at all as we would a shorter skirt. The waistband has a finished height of 1 inch, so this is 1 inch right here. The zipper is 8.5 inches long. That includes the portion that goes through the zipper. As we can see, it goes through and ends at the top of the waistband. The princess seams located in the back are 3 inches from the center back. So this distance here is 3 inches. And the darts on the front, the 3 darts, start at 3 inches from the center front. So center front being here to here is 3 inches. And they are spaced a 1/2 inch apart. Okay, so let's get started. Now we're going to draft this using the skirt sloper found on Brightspace, and you should do the same. Now let's start with the darts on the front. So let's zoom in. Now there are 2 darts, and we would like to make 3 darts instead of the 2. Now let's remember that to create any number of darts from the given number of darts, what we do is we add the total width of the darts and divide it by the desired number of darts. So let's go ahead and take some measurements of our darts using our measure tool. So I'm going to measure, zoom in a little bit more. From here to here, which is our width of the dart, and we have a width of 0.62. So let's put that in. And we'll measure the other one. We know that it's the same width, but sometimes it's not. So it's always good to measure all your darts. And it is the same width. So let's add that. So that's our total dart width, which is the width of both of our darts added up. Now what I want to do with this number is divide it by the desired number of darts. So I'm going to divide by 3. 3 is the desired number of darts. And this number is going to be the width of each one of those new darts. Okay, so remember that I can round it up to, or just round it to 0.41. That's fine. Now, I'm also going to go ahead and measure the length of the dart, because even though the width of our new darts is going to change, the length of our dart is not going to change. Each of them is going to be 3.5 inches long. Okay, now that we have all of our measurements, I'm going to grab the select tool and go ahead and delete our existing darts. Remember that we select the dart by clicking on the very tip of the dart. If you know it's going to be selected, it will turn red. So I'm just going to select it. The little box will show up, and I'll click delete. Now I'm going to go ahead and delete our original points for the dart, as they'll get in our way when we make our new original darts. This one I'm going to keep, as it sort of helps to blend in that little rise. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn off the grading for that point so it will not affect our measurements. Okay? Now what I'm going to do is I am going to select the Add Point on Contour tool, keyboard shortcut O. And I'm going to measure out 3 inches from our center front. This is, of course, our center front waist side seam. And I'd like that first point to be 3 inches from our center front point. So I'm going to click, and if the measurement box is not popping up for you, just press Alt before you hit the key, hit for the point, hit your mouse, and your measurement box will pop up. Now remember that our measurements are either done in absolute measurements, which are hard numbers, hard measurements, which is actually what we have. We have 3 inches, or a proportionate value, which would be a percentage of the distance between our 2 measurable points, which of course in this case is our center front and our side seam waist point. Now, this point, we have to figure out, is it our previous point or our next point? Remember, we measure in a clockwise direction around the piece. This is the point in question. If we travel clockwise, this is the next point we hit. So we want to measure from our next point. So I'm going to hit 3 in there. And I want to take measurements from this point. So I'm going to ensure that it is a grading point. And I'm going to hit OK. Now that is the point. That's the start of our darts. So I want to make our first dart here. Now we're going to be measuring, as we're always kind of going in this direction. It'll be our next points. And remember, the width of our new darts is going to be 0.14, we determined. Okay. Now we want our second dart. And we know that the distance between the darts is 1/2 inch because that was specified in our instructions. So we say OK. And the width of all of our darts is going to be that same 0.41. And on to our third and last dart. Again, the spacing is going to be 0.5. The space between each of the darts is equal. And that last distance is, again, of course, always going to be that same one if we're all having equal darts. So we say, OK. Now there are our 3 darts. 1, 2, 3. We have to go ahead and put them in, and we will go ahead and do that with our dart tool. So I'm going to go over to darts and pleats and grab our dart tool. And to do this, we're going to click twice for the width, and then the third click will be our depth. So 1, 2 for the width, and 3 clicks for our depth. Now we're going to make sure that the depth is correct. As we finish the dart, this window will pop up, and I will just make sure that it is the correct depth. And I'm going to do that twice more. 1, 2 for width, third for depth, correct the length, and once again. All right. Now we have 3 darts on our front, just like is specified in our flat. The next thing I'm going to want to do is I'm going to want to do the flounce. Now I can do it after, but it'll be a little bit easier to do before I cut the princess seam for the back. So let's go ahead and do the flounce. Now our only specification for the flounce is that this seam where the flounce begins happens at about 50% of the full length. Now we could go ahead and measure and do it numerically, but we don't actually have to. What's good about Optitext is we can go ahead and use the proportionate value and place a point 50% of the full length. The full length being, of course, from center back to the hem, or center front to the hem. So I just want to place a point here that's 50% in the middle. Now, what's going to prevent us from doing that is actually these points here, because they're grading points. So if I place a point here, it's only going to measure between this point and this point. So the way to fix that is to select this point, right-click, go to Attributes, and deselect the grading. And I'm going to do that on both sides. Whoops, I don't know what I did. Did something. Now both of those grading points have been turned off. Their grading has been turned off. So now I can measure between this point and this point. So let's go ahead and place a point right at that middle point. And now instead of using our absolute value, I'm going to use the proportionate value. And half is, of course, 50%. So we'll go ahead and put it there. I'm going to use a grading point just so I can kind of see it well. Okay, now I could go ahead and do it over here as well. But what I think is a little faster when doing any sort of cropping or slicing for both skirts is to use a guideline. So I'm going to click on the top ruler and I'm going to click and drag down a guideline and put it right down here and make sure that both of my pieces are sitting right on that line. Now what I can do is drag another guideline down and place it right on that point that I just made. Now this guideline will give me a little bit of help when I go ahead and cut that seam for the flounce. And that's what I want to do now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Build and Cut and grab my Cut Pieces tool, keyboard shortcut C, and go ahead and cut starting at my point along the line. Now I need to cut each piece individually as the cut piece tool can't cut multiple pieces. I'm going to leave my seam at 0 for now. We'll add in later. And then I'm going to go ahead and cut my other piece across like so. Here I have my two pieces. Again, we'll leave our seam width at 0 right there. So now what we've done is we've cut our skirt into two, each piece. Our front skirt is essentially done except for the finishing that we need to do because we have our 3 darts. The back skirt will need to go back and put that princess seam in. But for now, what we're going to do is go ahead and flare out the bottom of our skirts. And the front and the back are going to be done the same way. And what we're going to do is we're going to cut each piece into 3 vertical slices and then rotate them out and redraft the resulting shape. So let's grab our cut piece tool again. And I want to cut them into 3 equal pieces. So what I'm going to do is use my proportionate value here to do 0.3. That will be from my previous point. Again, if this is the point in question, we travel around the piece clockwise. I hit this point next, travel around, and this one previous to the piece again. I'm going to say OK, and then we're going to cut it straight down. And again, now since we're at the bottom, our directions have flipped. So I want 0.3 from my next point. Let's say OK. That's my first. Now, since this is already cut off, I just need the midpoint of the resulting piece here, the leftover piece. So I'm going to use the proportionate value of 0.5, cut down, proportionate value of 0.5. So that will give me 3 equal pieces. Again, I'm not putting seam allowance on any of them currently. And now let's do it for our last piece over here, the front piece. Same thing. Technically it's 0.33, but we'll be good. Oops. See, you always got to do it in the correct place. I did it from the wrong point. If that happens to you, just check to see what point you are measuring from. It can be tricky, but you'll get used to it. And it's okay if you make a mistake. Control Z is your friend. Undo. So now that we have our three pieces, we want to rotate them out. And to do this, what we want to do is we want to keep the center back and the center front on grain or on the straight grain. So this guy right here, right, that was right here. That's the continuation of our center back. So I'm going to keep this one straight. I'm going to rotate these other twos to flare outwards like this. Well, you'll see a little bit better than my mouse movement. So let's go to rotation. Let's choose that rotate piece tool. And I'm going to click on the rotate point, which would be the point that connects with the previous piece. So this guy right here, that will mark it as our point of rotation. I just have to click once, and then I can move the mouse to rotate it. Click it once more to drop it down. And it's going to ask exactly how many degrees I want to rotate it by. Let's keep it even if we want an even flare, and it is an even flare. We're going to rotate each piece by the same amount. So I'm going to rotate this by 30 degrees, which is a good amount. Again, you can choose your own, but 30 degrees is fine. I'm going to go ahead and on my third piece over here, the point that would match up here, I'm going to select as my point of rotation. And on this time, I'm going to rotate it 60 because I want, if this one was rotated out 30, I want another 30 degrees between the pieces. So this was 30, this will be 60. Okay, now that all my pieces are rotated, I'm going to go ahead and align them into place. So let's grab my select tool, and I'm going to line up the points here, and I want to make sure that they touch each other. Let's give myself a little bit more room by going down. So if you want to zoom in on this point, it will help because we want these pieces to touch. Any sort of gap will create extra space, and so it will not fit into this seam where it's supposed to. Any sort of overlap will make it too short and it won't fit. So we want to line them up so they're just touching, not overlapping, and no gaps. And again, use your zoom tool. It will help you tremendously. Because sometimes you can't see whether there is a gap or not. All right. Now before we go and draft, let's go ahead and do it on our other side. So on this case, this is the extension of our center front here. So this guy stays straight, and we're going to rotate the others out accordingly. So I just hit R for the keyboard shortcut for my rotate piece tool. And we're going to do that same 30 degrees, but since we're rotating out to the left instead of the right, it's going to be a negative 30. Remember, negative measurements, degrees, or measurements in OptiText typically indicate the direction in which they're going to occur. All right. Now let's line these guys up. Again, let me zoom in. Just to make sure, again, no significant overlaps or gaps. There you have like at this measurement, so even if you have a little tiny and it's not doing, it's probably not enough to really matter. You just don't want anything super big, and it's always good to try to be as precise as possible. All right, now that we have, I'm going to go ahead, since we no longer need these guidelines, I'm going to go ahead and delete them just so we have a nice sort of clear space to work with. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to protect all these pieces so I can draft over them without connecting a new line to them. So I'm going to select all the pieces, and I'll do that just by clicking on them. And of course, you can do multiple select by holding down the Shift key while you do it. Once they're selected, I can right click. Ooh, sorry about that. All right, I'll just go to piece properties. The piece properties window is not up. You can use your, again, select tool to right click, go to attributes, and it'll bring up the piece properties. Hopefully not bring up the rotate piece tool. Okay. Let me just go there so that doesn't happen again. And I'm going to go ahead and select all of these guys. And again, we can right click, go to attributes, which will pop up my piece properties window where I can protect them. Now, of course, we know they're protected because they will go ahead and gain that blue sort of twill line. And once they are all selected or protected, we can go ahead and start drafting the shape that they create. Now I'm going to go to my toolbox and go to blanking on where it is. Here it is, my favorite tools. Click on the draft tool, keyboard shortcut D, and I'm going to go ahead and draft this entire shape. Now the measurements are not going to be important. Well, they are important, but we've basically already put the measurements in, right? We really just want to trace the shape. So the measurement box will probably pop up, but I'm going to select that it doesn't pop up. Now it's also going to ask if I want to remove the protection, to which I'm going to say no. Here's my measurement box, and I'm going to disable this box for this process, or else I'd have to come and just click OK or cancel every time I click. It's a little bit faster, a little bit easier. Again, once I disable it, if I want it to come back again, just hold down the Alt key before clicking. Remember that I'm going to hold down the Shift key as I make these curved points and release the Shift key when I want to go back to hard corners or non-curved points. Remember that if you do make a mistake and forget to release your Shift or forget to hit Shift, you can always go back and fix it. And maybe I'll make a mistake here so I can show you that process. So for instance, I'm going to forget to release Shift here, so I get a curved point at the center front, which will make the piece look quite odd, but it will be easier to fix it afterwards than to delete everything and start over again. So I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my select tool, drag this out, select that point that I want to change the properties, right click, go to attributes, and click off the curve and click on the grading. Now, because it has a little bit, we did that, and we'll want to check this for the other one. Remember, whenever we have anything like this come across the center front, we want a nice squared line. So I'm going to grab my Move Point tool, keyboard shortcut M, or go to Movement and Move Point. And I'm just going to grab this point here and move it up slightly so we get a nicer square line coming or square angle, I should say, coming across that center front line. And I'll probably have to do it over here too. This is very important, especially with anything that's going to be put on the fold, and this is going to be put on the fold. So let's go ahead. I'm going to go back and bring this guy out. And again, just lift this guy up just to ensure that we have a nice sort of square angle. And again, zoom in if you need to. And now we are done with drafting the flounce. And what's important to do at this point, because these guys look very similar, is to go ahead and change the piece name. I like to do that pretty shortly after I draft, so I don't mix up which is the front and which is the back. Of course, you can always align the center front and the center back, but sometimes it's a little trickier. So I'm going to right click on like the piece, go to attributes, or just click, select it and go to piece properties if it's already up. And in the name, I'm going to change it to front flounce. Boop. Do the same for the back. Now we will not confuse the two. We are done with our template pieces, so I can go ahead and delete them. If it will let me. Okay, you will let me. All right. So again, aside from finishing, we are done with our back flounces pieces. Of course, we'll have to add seam allowance, pattern information, and change the grain line. But let's, before we start finishing, go ahead and draft that princess seam. Now, just to quickly refer back to our flat, so we have this done, we have this done, the 3 darts. What we want to do is go ahead and make this princess seam. Now, what we're going to do that is we're going to combine those 2 darts into 1 dart. We can imagine that 1 dart is hidden in the seam, which allows for the fit and shape of the back to occur. Of course, we want some nice full roundness in back because typically people have butts, so they're nice and full and round. So we want our skirt to be nice and full and round right there. So to do that, we are going to first apply that same dart manipulation technique that we did for the front, but just in a slightly different manner. So instead of making 3 darts or 2 darts into 3 darts, we're going to make 2 darts into 1 dart. But the process is the same. So we're going to go ahead and start by measuring. Ooh, I think I was in the right place. Each of our darts to get our total dart width. So I'm going to measure, and we have 1 inch. And again, you might say, hey, I know that those 2 darts are the same width, but remember, not all slopers have the same width darts for both of them. Sometimes they're different, so it's always good to double check and measure. So both of those darts are 1. So we're going to add 1 and 1 and get 2. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to divide by the desired number of darts. Now remember, in the back, we'd want just one to fit into that princess seam. If we had 2 princess seams on each side, we could probably just keep it the way it is. But we have 1. We want to combine the dart to fit that full dart width into that seam. So 2 divided by 1, of course, is 2, as any number divided by 1 is itself. So we know that the resulting width of our 1 dart is going to be 2 inches, and we'll go ahead and take a measurement of the length of the dart to see how long it's going to be. It's going to be 5.5 because, again, the length of the dart doesn't typically change. You can change it a little bit for design and style, but it shouldn't change dramatically. All right, just as before, I'm going to go ahead and delete both of my darts by selecting them, and I'm going to delete my previous points for the dart just as before, and I'll go ahead and turn the grading off of this guy just in case it gets in the way. All right, now we have specified on here that the princess seam is located 3 inches from the center back. So that is where we're going to put our new dart. We'll go ahead and put the points for our new dart. Now this is our center back point here. This is our side seam waist point. So I'm going to measure from here. Remember, we measure or find out what point it is by going in a clockwise direction. So if we see if this is the point in question, I travel, this is my next point that I hit after my point in question. And then traveling around, this is the point that I hit previous to my point in question. So I'm measuring from my previous point, so I'll put 3 inches in there, make sure that it's a grading point so I can measure from it, and say, okay. Now, just one dart, so I want to put that full width in here. So I'm going to go ahead, and again, I'm measuring from my previous point, that good 2 inches. That was a good click. All right, so there's my dart width. And again, just as before, I'm going to go ahead and grab my dart tool. 1, 2, 3, and have it specified to 5.5 inches in depth or length. All right, so that is part of our princess seam. It's going to be part of our princess seam. Now remember, whenever we have seams that run through areas of fullness, the back, the butt on the back of the skirt, or the bust on the front of the bodice when we get there, it's important to remember that we need to see those darts hiding in the seam. And you'll see that a little bit better when we get to cutting and actually create the seam. So I'm going to go ahead and go to build and cut, and I'm going to grab my cut piece tool. Now the first thing I want to do is I want to cut out my dart. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to cut along the edge from that one point down to the tip, back up to the other side, and I'm basically just cutting out the dart. I no longer need this shape, so I can select it and delete it. Now all that I need to do is cut a line from the tip of my dart down to the hem. So I'm going to go back to that cut piece tool, keyboard shortcut C if you don't like clicking. Cut on that tip of the dart and just head straight down. I'm going to try to get it as straight as possible. There we go. And we'll say, okay. Nice and straight. Actually, just to show you a little bit better way to do it, remember those guidelines we used before? Since we want a straight line, I can always drag out a vertical guideline and use that. So let me show you the better, more proper way to do it anyway. Then we make our insert a nice straight line from that tip of the dart. I'll say okay because we're going to add those seam allowances later. All right. Now to zoom out and sort of zoom out, take stock. We're done with pretty much all of the skirt techniques that we were going to do. We've created the princess seam in back, we've done the 3 darts in front, and we've created the flounce. Congratulations, you're done with all the heavy lifting. But we do still need to finish the pattern. Remember, this is not a finished pattern until we get the seam allowances, we rename the pieces, and we add all that pattern information. So let's go around and finish all of our pieces. If we look here, remember we don't want the word sloper in finished pieces. Slopers are not finished patterns. So what we do is we will typically take the name sloper out of the piece name, but I can name this front skirt. That's fine. So we'll go ahead and just rename it front skirt. I'm going to use the text tool to click on the pattern piece to give it pattern information. First of all, of course, my style number. Remember, it can be anything you want. Just make sure that all pieces of the pattern have the same style number. I'm going to give it a size. Remember that we used the size 8 sloper, so this is going to be a size 8 skirt. Now I also need cutting information. This, if we refer back to our drawing, is going to have be one piece. The center front is going to be placed on the fold. So we only have to cut one piece. So I'm going to say cut one self. Sometimes you can specify if it's going to be on fold right here, but it is better to specify where that on fold line is going to be. So I'm going to label the center front as on fold. If I want to flip it around, I'll go to the internal properties for the text box. Of course, you can always click on it, right click, go to attributes, go to 0 degrees, and change it to 90. That's going to go ahead and flip it up. And we can go ahead and adjust the size and position with the arrow tool. If I want to make it a little bit bigger, I can drag out the box. If I hit the I key, I can pick up and drop down. That's hitting the I key while your mouse is in the select tool and the text is selected. That will make the cursor change to a little hand, and you can click it once to pick it up and click it again to drop it down wherever you like. All right. Last but not least, let's go ahead and do our seam allowance. This will have a 1/2 inch all the way but the center front. Remember, on fold lines do not ever have seam allowance. So let's go to our seam box. Go to our seam tool, keyboard shortcut S, and in a clockwise motion, remember we have to apply the seams in a clockwise motion. Go from here to here. Remember that looks like I'm putting it on the center front, but since OptiTux cannot go in this counterclockwise direction, it has to start here and go all the way around up to here. I'm going to add 0.5, a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I'm going to click this corner seam option of 2 to ensure that we have nice mitered corners. Good practice. All right. Now we are done with our front skirt piece. Let's head over to our back pieces. Now, in this case, we have 2 pieces, and remember our piece names are there to help us understand the position and location in the pattern. So, this is not a good example. A lot of students will keep it as back skirt 1 or back skirt 2. Label it something a little bit more informational. So here we have a piece. If we look at this is the pieces in the center, and these are the pieces on the side. So in this case, it's most common to label it something like back skirt center or center back skirt. However you list them doesn't really matter, just so long as those important words are there to let you know where it's supposed to be placed. So we can label that back skirt center, and we can label this back skirt side. Again, if you want to do it center back skirt and side back skirt, that's fine as well. Just make sure that information is there. All right, both of these pieces have a 1/2 inch seam allowance all the way around. So we're going to get that seam tool again in the toolbox seam or keyboard shortcut S. Since it's going to go all the way around, I click on one point, any point, and then click on it again and enter in my seam width, which will be 0.5. We're going to keep that corner option of being mitered. And there we are. Do the same over here. Okie dokie. Let's go ahead and put in our text. Again, with that text tool, you can select it from General Tools or keyboard shortcut T. Remember, the style number is going to stay the same with all pieces as well as the size. This will be cut 2. We need 2 pieces, one right, one left, out of our self fabric. Let's start with our style. If you have a lot of pieces, sometimes copying one and then pasting it into the other can save you a bit of time. All right. Now we're pretty good except for one other thing. If we go back, remember that we have our zipper right here. So we're going to need to include a notch on our center back to show where it is. Now, remember it says that the zipper is 8.5 inches long, including the portion that goes through the waistband. The waistband is 1 inch. So there's 1 inch right here, and the remaining 7.5 come down into that center back skirt piece. So what we're going to do is from that center back waist point, we're going to measure down 7.5 inches to go ahead and place the notch. I'll go ahead and grab the notch tool from points and notches in the toolbox or keyboard shortcut N, and we'll go ahead and click, and our box will pop up. We want to measure from this point. Again, that is going to be our next. If we travel around in a clockwise motion, from this point, we hit this one next. And so now we have our notch. And now for good measure, let's go ahead and label that there will be a zipper here. And let's go ahead and just adjust a little bit so it fits right on that edge right there. So now we know that there's going to be a zipper here and where it ends. And we are done with that center back piece. All right. Now let's go ahead and finish up our flounce pieces. The flounce pieces, as we can see, are going to be placed on fold in the center front and center back, as there's no seam here. So there's not going to be any seam allowance on the center front or center back. I'm going to go ahead and add a 1/2 inch all the way around, except for, again, my center front and center back. And you might say, hey, aren't we supposed to do a little bit longer for hem allowances, like 1 inch to 2 inches, preferably about 1.5 inches? Usually, yes. However, this is the exception to that rule. When you have curved hems, like on flared skirts, we don't want the hem allowance to be any more than 1/2 inch. This is because when we try to hem and fold back that hem allowance to finished curved lines, that extra amount can start to bunch up. And it creates these sort of bunches and lumps in the fabric, which we want to avoid. So we keep the hem allowance on curved hems no more than 1/2 inch. If you have a straight hem, by all means, 1 inch, 2 inches, 1.5 inches, go for it. That's the preferred method. Gives you a little bit more to do that hem allowance. But on curved hems, we want to keep it a bit shorter. So when I go ahead and grab my seam tool in seam or keyboard shortcut S, I'm going to go around in clockwise and hit a 1/2 inch, miter those corners, and that looks good to me. And I'll do the same on the back. And again, if you are getting the opposite, so if only you're getting seam allowance only on your center back or front, just try clicking in a different order. Remember, it does need to be applied in a clockwise fashion. So see, right there, if that happens, just hit undo, Control Z, and then go ahead and do it in the opposite direction. Oops, I don't know what happened. Ooh, my mouse is not clicking properly. Oh no, am I gonna have to switch to mouse? Okay, let me do it with my other mouse, which is also not clicking properly. Come on, come on. Uh-oh. Okay, it will register clicks. Let's just save this real quick. Do you remember save? OptiText can have an option of crashing, and I'm not sure what's going on right now. All right. Okay. Let's try it again. I'm not sure what happened there, but we're back on track. So it's always just a good option to just click on random things till it works. Let's make sure we get those nice mitered corners. Oh, looks like I didn't miter these corners, so let's go ahead. Let's reapply this, and I'll make sure to get those, click on that mitered corners option. Okay, all right. Now it's looking pretty good, except we have, of course, a few more things to do. What I want to do first is something new. As you can tell, these grain lines are not correct. Grain lines always align with any on-fold line. So we want to go ahead and fix them. So I'm going to go to my baseline option in the toolbox. And I'm going to select baseline direction or keyboard shortcut \. Since we're aligning it with the center front and center back lines, I'm going to click on the bottom of my center front and the top, which it will go ahead and do. I'm going to double check. I just want to make sure that all my arrowheads are pointing in the same direction. Now, that's really important when you're working with directional fabrics because they will tell you which way either the nap or the directional print is supposed to go. So if I had one, say, pointing down and I had, let's say a print of balloons, I want, of course, all my balloons soaring upwards to the sky, not sadly falling down to the ground. But if this guy was reversed, my balloons on this piece would be sadly falling to the ground instead of floating upward happily to the sky. So we want to keep our arrowheads, and that's actually essentially why our grain lines only have one arrowhead instead of two. All right, let's add in our pattern information as well as our on-fold lines. Of course, style number. These are placed on fold, so we're only cutting one piece essentially. So each of these is going to have the same pattern information, same size, and cut one cell for both. All right, let's put our on-fold markers on. All right, and then with that select tool, let's go ahead and turn them. And I'll just zoom in. We can make it a little bit bigger if you want. Remember, when you print it out, it will certainly be bigger. And then hit the I key while that text is selected and you're in that arrow key to pick up the text. All right, now I'll hit the I key, see the cursor change, click once to pick it up, click again to drop it, And we're good. We're done with our back pieces. Hooray, we are almost done. The finishing on all of our pieces is done. We have our back piece, and you can see, as I was mentioning before, that you need to be able to see that dart in a seam that's used for fit. Princess seam is being used for fit. Again, if I couldn't see that dart, if it was just flat, there is no negative space, we're not going to get any fullness, any roundness, and our butts wouldn't be able to fit into our skirt. Either our butts wouldn't be able to fit or it'd be too loose at the waist. We're not going to get that round, nice sort of doming shape that we need in the back of the skirt. Our front is also done, and we have our flounce pieces right here. They're done. Seam allowance and all looking good. Now, the last thing that we need to do is we need to draft our waistband. Now, this is fairly easy. Again, we need to finish the waist somehow. We're either going to finish it with a waistband, or you can potentially use a facing too if you do not want to have a waistband on a skirt or a pant. But in this case, we are going to use a waistband. Now, we haven't made any alterations to the waist in terms of length. So we can go ahead and use the measurement that we used for the skirt sloper. If you forget what that is, don't worry, because we can just go ahead and measure it. And this sometimes is a good thing to do, just to make sure that your waistband is going to be long enough. So I'm going to grab that measure tool and I'll measure this bit. Well, we know what that bit is. I'm going to measure it all. All right, let's not forget the front. Now remember that these darts are negative space. So what I'm going to do instead of use the measure tool, because the measure tool doesn't understand that these darts are going to be closed and they are not going to contribute to the total length of the waist. I'm going to use my select tool and select the waist up here, go to design segment length. Now this is good for any measurement that's not a straight line measurement. If you have different curves you want to measure, you can do it this way. Or if you don't want darts to calculate into that length. And we have 7.15. Okay. Ooh, right. Something went wrong. Good thing I remember the numbers. My mouse is acting up. Sometimes I'm double clicking. All right. So this is, remember, half of our waist. The waist, of course, is going to be all the way around, and we'll go ahead and make the waistband for it. So what I want to do with this number, this is still not correct. What is, I'm sorry. This is the number that we want. So I'm going to multiply it by 2. And that's going to give us our entire skirt length. So you might recognize that 27.5 inches from drafting the skirt sloper. And again, since we did not alter the length of the skirt, this is the correct number. And I'll leave it at 27.5. We'll just round it. That will be fine. So to draft our waistband, I'm going to grab, go to piece, new piece, create a rectangular piece. In it, I want to enter the length that we just calculated. With some difficulty. And the width, remember, needs to be double the finished height. So if we look back in here, we say, okay, it's 1 inch. It's 1 inch. Remember, it gets folded at the top over to finish the waistline. So we draft our waistbands to be double the finished height. So double 1 is, of course, 2. And we'll say, okay. Oh, but before we do, let's name it waistband. Of course, we can always fix the name afterwards, but we'll just do it now. I'm just going to get rid of that guideline. Now, of course, just like anything else, we're going to want seam allowance all the way around. Let's do 1/2 inch all the way around. And waistbands are pattern pieces too, so they also get pattern information. And in addition to the cut self piece, I'm going to include a cut interfacing piece. Most waistbands have interfacing to give it a little bit more strength and structure. If you are using a very thick fabric, you might not use the cut interfacing instruction, but most times if you're cutting a waistband, it will have a self piece and an interfacing piece. Now, additionally, I'm going to add a zipper. Remember, the zipper goes through our waistband. So I'm going to put it right here, along with a notch. Now, essentially, it'll be both sides, but we can go ahead and just do it on one. I put the notch right in the middle, because remember that middle part is the part that's going to be folded over, so essentially it will end there. So again, our zipper goes from the top here down to here, 8.5 inches. All right, we know where it starts and where it stops on the back piece over here. Now let's zoom out and take a look at what we got, because we are done. Congratulations. Go ahead, save it. Here is our full pattern. The waistband up here, where it goes. So hopefully you had a good time with this. Hopefully you are learning a little bit more about the sort of seam and dart and flare manipulations. So once you are done with this, again, please save it as a PDS file. Name it Your Name Mermaid Skirt and submit it to Brightspace. All right, have a good one.